Metals are essential for every major technology, and our dependence on them is only increasing with the energy transition. It's vital that miners keep extracting metals to meet our needs. Yet they face many challenges, social, economic, and political, putting supply at risk. To explore these challenges and potential solutions, we have Dr. Ingrid Putkonen, Managing Director and founder of Metals for Humanity, join us today. Welcome to the Commodity Exchange, a podcast where we bring you insights from the world of commodities. Whether you're an investor or just want to learn more about the topic, this is the podcast for you. So welcome, Ingrid. Please do tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to become the founder of Metals for Humanity, and tell us a bit about what Metals for Humanity does.
Thank you, Nitesh, for having me on your podcast. It's an honor. My name is Ingrid Putkonen, and I am the founder of Metals for Humanity. It's an organization that was set up, it started about 10 years ago, and it evolved along the way. I'm an anthropologist by training. So the work that I've done has been mostly focused on organizations and their impact on local communities. And this is long before I got into mining. After I finished my PhD, I came back to Vancouver. And in Vancouver, there are, of course, as most people know, in this sector, many junior mining companies that operate here. And many of these companies have realized the importance of having and securing and maintaining a social license to operate. So being also a native Spanish speaker, I'm originally from Mexico, with a background in anthropology, it became clear that I had abilities that would help many of these mining companies operate in Latin America and address these social complexities that they were facing. On the one hand was the question of identifying what these sort of social risks would be or could be, and what could be done about it. And so the way that I began working is I began doing these sort of social risk and opportunities assessments. I was typically hired by the executive team, often by the CEOs, who felt, and I think rightly so, that they really didn't have the kind of detailed, nuanced appreciation of what was going on the ground in the field. So they would get reports from middle management and from other field teams at the mine site, but they didn't really have a thorough appreciation of what was going on. So in those early projects that I did, I became in some ways the eyes and ears for these executives. So I would go, and again, as an anthropologist, I would spend some time talking to the local people, the people that worked at the mine and adjacent communities, NGOs, local governments, and so on, and produce a kind of report that was useful to the executives. And it was. I was often told that how useful that was. But what I noticed is that it wasn't always very straightforward for them how or what to do with those reports. One thing is to have a report sent to you. Sometimes you can deliver a 50, 70-page report, and they'll ask you, actually, it's a little bit too long. Can you make it shorter? So then you produce a shorter version, 20 pages. They get that. That's good. Can you make that shorter? 10 pages. That's great. Sorry, can I have it just on 3 pages? And that's a process, and that's important. And when you present those sorts of reports, it's crucial that you can present reports that are meant to inspire executives to see the opportunity to seize on something that will help them do their work better, not just for the communities, but for their own selves. And there's a real art in making explicit what is often known implicitly, so that it makes sense for them and they see that as an organic evolution from where they are. So anyway, that was the objective with producing these reports. And often it resonated, and they saw that there were certain issues that needed to be addressed and implemented, but they didn't know how. So, while you have great engineers and financiers often managing these companies, they don't have this social competency. Understandably, that is not their area. And yet they recognize more and more, well, but I need to do something about it. So there is this opportunity there to create that connection, that bridging between the needs that they have, the recognition of what they need to do, but how to actually go about it. And so that's where I started, uh, doing smaller projects. But then the real sort of game changing moment came where we realized that mining companies operating in these sites where I was in Latin America could more than just sort of be reactive and even proactive, they could actually really take on a leadership role in a way that could really signal a move forward for the mining industry. And so one of the lessons I learned was about a program that Tech Resources launched, yeah, over 15 years ago, called the Sync Saves Kids program. And basically, they saw this great opportunity to use Sync and work with organizations like UNICEF in order to get Sync to UNICEF. And in this way, of course, UNICEF having the mandate um, to address malnutrition and challenges that children around the world were facing. One of the statistics that came across the desk of Tech, which is what prompted them to take on this project, was that every year almost 1 million children died from zinc deficiency. And of course, as a zinc producer, they thought, well, here's an opportunity for us. It was a little bit complicated for them to do that um, because, especially at the time, there weren't many alliances between mining companies on the one side and NGOs on the other side. So it was a watershed moment. It was a watershed moment that also influenced, I think, the SDGs with the recognition of the importance that if we want to change the world, we have to make sure that it's not just governments and civil society that are trying to do this, but we need the private sector. And the mining industry began to take this role. So Tech provided I mean, again, they broke through this model and they provided an example of how they could work with an international organization and how they could use how sync could be used to address a global challenge. So what I learned from that um, was, yes, let's look at your very product. Let's look at your very product and what it can do. And just like Tech used that and worked with UNICEF to address zinc deficiency in certain parts of the world. And I thought that was wonderful. That was very inspirational. But the opportunity that I saw there was, well, why don't we use those very products that you are extracting to address the challenges and needs in the very communities adjacent to your operations? Because then you have an opportunity to address the needs that these communities have with your own products, your very own products, and launch an educational campaign that teaches local people about the benefits of those very products. So, for example, we have an initiative on silver and water that we have launched with the world's largest silver producer, Fresnillo PLC, a Mexican-based company. Silver, of course, has antibacterial properties. So again, following on that model, we have identified solutions that use silver to disinfect water. And we have introduced these solutions in some of these communities, not just addressing the challenge of access to clean water, safe, clean water, but also these great educational workshops and activities where the people really grasp. On the one hand, they're holding the glass of water that they can drink, and on the other hand, they're learning about the power of silver to disinfect water through programs like Citizen Scientists, where the very local people take water samples from the community, and then we take them to a lab and they apply silver on it, and they can see the impact of silver on that contaminated water. So it's really powerful because it's not greenwashing. We're using science to empower people to understand what is happening um, with their water. And so these educational aspects really bring that to life. You really are able to bring science to life, and you're really empowering and educating people with this information. So that was to me the missed opportunity that I thought the mining industry, you know, was not focusing on making their products part of the solution and creating these educational um, campaigns and workshops to educate people. And that's crucial because I think for a long time, a lot of people in communities thought, oh, well, these metals are being extracted and they're going off to, these faraway places, to these lovely places where people are living better lives in London, in New York, in Vienna, in you name it. Um, and so, how were they benefiting? So, the, what we've done is this kind of re encounter with the benefits of the metals, bringing the metals back to them in a form that is beneficial to them. And in so doing, I think one of the key aspects, I think one of the reasons that the mining executives that are attracted to Metals for Humanity is because they see how the metals are coming back to the community in a way that is useful to people, and it allows, of course, people to appreciate and support the mining industry because now they're having this direct benefit. And in so doing, we are looking at ensuring that those benefits are equally shared. So it's not just some parts of the world that are enjoying these benefits, but it's those very communities that, at some points were neglected or just were not enjoying those benefits. So there is a mission to the work that we do, about prosperity and equality being central to it.
Wow, that's really fascinating to use the actual materials that you're digging up from the local community to give back to the community and providing that educational program. It's that's a great way of squaring the circle there. You recently produced a report with FT Longitude, titled "Fueling the Green Transition: The
Yes,
Mining Investment Gap."
yes,
Um, I think I contributed, a couple of
you
lines within
did.
that report,
Yes,
and the report highlights significant underinvestment in the mining sector,
yeah.
despite its crucial role in the green transition. Uh, what do you see as the primary reasons for the hesitation amongst institutional investors?
Yeah, that report that we commissioned, with the FT Longitude. It was a very valuable report, yes, because it brought us in contact with investors and asset managers, and that's how we met you, Nitesh, which was wonderful. And yes, it gave us this opportunity to well, of course, many things you already have access to, already are aware of, and then there's some other aspects that perhaps are novel. But it really served, in our case, to reconfirm what we were doing at Metals for Humanity. The top concern that came from one of the surveys was around social responsibility. So, of the list that we provided in the survey, um, social responsibility was the number one. I think 31% of respondents placed it at number one. So again, this is the topic that we're discussing. And then the other two, I think, that came in tied. One of them had to do with reputational risk, which is understandable. And then the other one had to do with the business model. And these three to me are tied together, and they for us it was a reaffirmation of the focus that we had on our approach, because of course we're focused on social performance of the mining industry. Um, we also understand that if we're able to implement and independently measure the impact of our programs, then that information will be very valuable to the public, obviously to the local communities, to the local government, to the investors, right? Because we can demonstrate, and through the help of independent parties, what the impact of those programs are. And again, these are programs that are using the very metals to address the challenges that these communities face. So that's very valuable, and it allows us to communicate that. But which will reduce. So on the one hand, we're looking at reducing reputational risk with the programs that we implement. And on the other hand, we're looking at increasing reputational value. And one important way of doing that is, yes, by communicating, by sharing the work that we do and the results, the independently validated results. So through those two aspects, I think you're able to have a comprehensive approach where you're implementing and reducing operational risk, and where you're communicating and increasing your reputational value. And that's where communications and a communications program, and here, here it's important. It's, you don't want the kind of communications program that is just focused on photo ops, or just one or two stories. I mean, you really want a kind of communications program that is evidence based, on real programs on the ground that you're implementing, again, that are independently measured, that can provide all kinds of qualitative and quantitative data, and yes, testimonials also that are compelling and tell the story from the heart. That's also very, very valuable. If you can take these two aspects and embed them in the business model of the mining company, then that's when you ensure that these kinds of social programs will remain part of what the mining company is doing for the long term. This has been a challenge for a very, very long time, with social programs in the mining industry. Of course, junior mining companies have less resources. They have a different game plan on what they're trying to do, but that can create a lot of problems with local communities and other groups that have other ideas. So you often end up with these kinds of ad hoc social programs, and sometimes the core executive team of the mining company sees these social programs, ESG programs, well, not all, but some of them, at like a checklist or extraneous to what they're doing. So the challenge, but opportunity, I'd like to say, really lies in embedding it as part of the business model. And again, in creating a social program that is centered on the metals themselves, where the metals themselves are driving that positive change in the communities. That way, the mining company continues to see that as part of what they do. And so, as opposed to dropping a social program during, like we're seeing now, where many organizations and companies are not seeing the need to keep up with their ESG mandates, if it's embedded into the business model, then it's more likely to remain a priority for the mining company. And that's, of course, in the long term, because, while different things can happen where perhaps some governments might become less stringent and allow mining companies to operate without such great ESG standards as they may have done in the past, given the current climate. Local communities are going to continue operating, are going to continue doing what they do. So a local community can stop a mining operation in spite of what's going on. So even if a mining company retracts on their ESG practices, I mean, the local community will respond accordingly. And we have seen many cases of this across time. So there will always be that pressure for the mining companies to ensure that they maintain their social license with the local communities. So I don't see that becoming too much of an issue in spite of what we're seeing geopolitically.
And so, another thing sort of raised in the report, transparency and traceability in mining operations. They're really sort of emphasized as a way to attract investment. What practical steps can mining companies take to enhance that transparency and build trust with investors and local communities?
Yeah, that did come out in the report, and I think for price premium, it was one of the top um, suggestions. Yeah, absolutely. And transparency and traceability, and that's going to become crucial right now. We can also talk about this later with defense metals, but in the work that we've been doing at Metals for Humanity, and what we're hoping to be able to do soon with, for example, Fresnillo, the Mexican mining company that I mentioned, um, we're looking at launching a extended program where we can trace the silver that is extracted from one of their mines that then goes to the Peñoles smelter, which Peñoles is a sister company of Fresnillo, and then from there to the jewelers of a jewelry company, Dane, which is again also a sister company. And so taking this model of the journey of silver from the mine to the smelter to the jewelers, and making that story public, it's a well, there you've got a traceability program. You got you're able to make this transparent, and you're able to do so much more than that because it puts the spotlight on the programs at that mine site from where the silver comes. So it's the the mining company becomes inspired because they have a great opportunity to tell a story. So rather than having a regulation or a compliance issue that is you know forcing you to do this, here you voluntarily rise to it. So it's this always this I guess Matters of Humanity has always been driven by the idea that if we can inspire companies to do things, they're more likely to do it and stick with it. And then especially with the younger generations that work at mining companies, they're looking for value-driven work, right? So the more of this work that you can provide for the younger generations, the more they're going to stay in the company, the more they're going to put their hearts into it. So this kind of program would be one example that if you can trace the silver from this mine, it goes to the smelter, and then you launch this campaign. You launch this campaign at the other side through the jeweler, because of course the jeweler is the one that has that contact with the public. It's harder for a commodity uh, to, you know, directly engage with the population in the positive way that we're looking to do it. But through the jeweler, it's much easier because, of course, people can walk into a jeweler and they look at, some pieces that they like, they're interested in a piece, and then they can learn all about, how the silver was mined for that piece, which these days, if you walk into most jewelry shops, they give you very little information. And we would be looking to encouraging more and more jewelers to provide that kind of information, making that available to the public. So you would learn about how that silver was extracted, how it moved, and then part of our program that we're doing is from the sale. I mean, what we're looking to do, we haven't yet done it, but this is what we're looking to do from the sales of these particular pieces, these beautiful silver jewelry pieces that Tane can produce. A percentage of that can then be directed to water programs in not back at the mine, because that we do with the mining company, but in public schools in Mexico City, where we can, with again many of the NGOs and other organizations that we work with, and we have been working with in Mexico City, putting in hand washing stations during COVID. We did that across many schools in Mexico City, but now it would be with this opportunity to introduce water disinfection um, systems for the schools where the children would have clean water to drink, using silver, of course, for that purpose, and having an opportunity there to introduce an education program very widely in these densely populated schools in Mexico City about, of course, water stewardship, but also about the power of silver, um, which, of course, would help strengthen as well the curriculum of the school on topics around science and chemistry.
Well, so yeah, I think that's really fascinating how you can how at downstream they can provide more information about where uh, the metals come from, give them more information about provenance and the information about the manner in which it's come to the to the retailer. Um, but I guess like offers an opportunity for I guess third parties for kind of validating some of these things along the supply chain. And I guess that's something that was also raised in the report. Do you think there's a greater need for this validation of all the stories along the value chain?
Yeah, I do think that's important. Um, and so that, that in our work, that is one of the areas that we're looking at, is who can help provide that validation. Um, there's organizations like IRMA who do that, and that I think would be very, very valuable. In the case of a jeweler, the Responsible Jewelry Council could be one. LBMA, of course, for the smelter. Um, so they've got a list that they call the Good Delivery List, and Peñoles, again, that I mentioned earlier, they're on this list. So we would have to work with those uh, certifying bodies for sure. I think that would be, and that is, like you said, it's something that came up in the report, right? Investors want to see. I mean, one thing that came up in the report was, yes, that they want to see more third parties involved for sure, but they also want to see the I mean, to some extent, the companies, telling these stories, but telling these stories in authentic ways, because often I think many of the data that comes out from mining companies comes out in ways that the majority of the public can't really digest. They really can't make a sense of it, and a lot of people don't believe it. So there has to be a different way to communicate, and yes, backed up by third parties. So something that I have found very beneficial was in bringing together a mining company and an NGO. Initially, they were skeptical about collaborating. Basically, we created the space for the mining CEO to meet with this founder of this NGO, a leading NGO in Mexico. And they sat and they had a conversation. And basically, the CEO invited the NGO founder to go visit a mine. So I took him to the mine and we spent 3 days there. And it was eye opening for him. It was absolutely eye opening because he really walked through it. He learned, he spoke to the people. And, now we collaborate ever since. So there's so much work. I mean, it's just sometimes very simple things at the very beginning don't happen, like having the proper kind of dialogue, rather than, okay, well, either not meeting at all, or just hearing about the other person, or just hearing what they do or don't do, or when they come together sitting across from a table in what can be experienced as a confrontational exchange. So um, just as an example that can help prove the point, one of the one of the exercises that we do at the beginning when we're uh, working with mining communities, and we're looking at, well, for one, learning more about their concerns and their needs, but also looking at how can we create greater dialogue between the community and the mining company. We have implemented these workshops, these photo voice workshops, where basically we, get, I don't know, half a dozen people from the mine and half a dozen people from the community. We give them cameras, and then we pair them up for a few days, and you'll have this, engineer and this indigenous leader who, probably don't even know each other, or certainly haven't had the time to really talk to each other. And they'll spend a few days, a few hours each day, and the task for them is, to walk around together with cameras, because they have to photograph, if the topic is water, then they have to photograph, whatever they photograph that somehow connects to water. So the mining engineer will take the indigenous leader perhaps into a water treatment plant, and then afterwards the indigenous leader might take the mining engineer to a source of water that has been depleting, and they start a conversation. And the conversation begins literally by two people not sitting across from each other in a confrontational way, but walking together, shoulder to shoulder, holding this camera, looking at the world, where the conversation flows in an open, natural way. And they start photographing and they talk about what concerns them or what they see. And at the end, there's an exhibit, and everybody sort of hangs their photographs. And every time, what we see is that these individuals that are paired up literally end up looking at the world through the lens of the other one.
Wow, that's a great way of seeing the world in somebody else's shoes. I guess is the yeah, is one way of looking at it. Yeah. Um. Now, turning the conversation around a little bit now. Um. Across the US and beyond, ESG seems to be in a bit partial retreat. Companies are pulling back from various DEI policies. Governments are often softening on their climate commitments, and there's a bit more of a pivot towards defense in reshaping priorities. Um, for mining, do you think these shifts pose challenges or potential opportunities? And maybe a mixture of both, and I don't know if you could explore them.
Yeah, well, yes, as we were saying, we're now living in an era where some organizations and companies are retracting on their ESG and DEI policies. It's obviously sad to see that that's where we are. Um, you know, when I started Metals for Humanity and I had this sort of maybe more idealistic view of what we were doing, given the current climate, your realism does sort of start to take over. So, I mean, we did have an increase for metals and this is what we were discussing in the FT report. There was an increase for metals that came for the energy transition, and the concern back then was, well, with this increased demand, um, which at the end of the day it's great because we'll have these renewable technologies, but the increased demand is going to put that much more pressure on the mining companies. What could the outcome of that be? So one of our concerns was, well, how do we make sure the demand is there? There's nothing we can do about that demand, whatever the driver. But how do we make sure that the mining companies continue to adhere to best practices? So that's the area that we focus on. How can we ensure? How can the public ensure? How can the public be informed about what we can do to ensure that mining companies continue to adhere to best practices? So that's from our perspective. What in the area that we can influence in the relationships that we have with mining companies. But I think your question goes to a larger issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think the next leg of demand for metals may also come from the defense sector, and obviously here in Europe, spending on defense is increasing substantially now that the US is withdrawing its military support for a lot of Europe. Um, do you think that the European um, increase in demand for defense and the metals that are needed for defense could potentially help to raise some of the standards for miners in terms of ESG, given the sort of the cultural bent of the European institutions historically?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that this increased demand for defense metals. So I mean, there was a letter by over 100 uh, labor parliamentarians and other peers calling for the removal of some anti-defense rules so that more investment could go into weapons manufacture. And one understands the call for that because, of course, Europe is looking at how are we going to defend ourselves in the face of an attack. And even though the Europeans are hesitant in doing this, well, that's what they're doing. They're looking at rearmament as a way to protect themselves. I mean, that's what anybody would do. That's understandable. So if that's the direction in which it's going, and you can't fault, on the contrary, I mean, you can't fault nations for wanting to protect themselves or protect their content. On the contrary, that is their duty to protect their citizens. I guess the angle that is important here to look at, would be the supply chains, and would be, yeah, I mean, where are these, from which mining companies are these metals being sourced from? So the focus would be to have greater scrutiny of the sourcing of these metals and the in greater transparency in terms of the whole delivery of them. And if you can do that, then and you can source from those companies, that's great. I guess at the other end of that is looking at once the weapons are manufactured and they're being used, if they're being used solely for defense purposes, then you're still within that realm of let's say on the side of a just war. um but I guess the concern there for asset managers would be, but what if these weapons are then taken, bought by a third party and used for other purposes? That would be a question that would be raised. But how much can you regulate?
Yeah. And I guess in this new world that we're living in potentially slightly more fragmented relations between various countries, well, primarily the US in terms of its, military withdrawal of military support, and then, its tariffs that it's applying on a large number of countries. Um, do you think that access to critical raw materials could be challenged as it gets kind of caught up in this trade war or, war of idealism? And do you think that will make kind of the work for various miners more challenging going forward?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I do think that this kind of fragmentation of the global landscape could definitely have an impact on access to critical minerals and other metals. I mean, there are some minerals that are primarily in certain areas of the world, and if those countries, say China and Russia, control it, and then they'll determine what happens. I mean, the Congo, of course, with cobalt, if the arrangement is with a certain mining company or certain nation for exclusive rights uh, to that mineral, well, then it will be only that company or country that would have access to it. And then, of course, there's the question of infrastructure. I mean, so many of these refineries are only in China. So, I have to believe that this is something that many mining companies and governments are looking at very closely. How do we set up the kind of infrastructure that we need so that we can also direct those sources in our direction and produce what we need to produce? But yeah, that, and I suppose there's also a strong possibility of resource nationalism. So, as a result of this kind of vertical integration. So yeah, yes, yeah, it is a very challenging landscape. It is a very, very challenging landscape. And you just, you do see this, after the Cold War. I mean, after the Cold War, when we no longer were worried about our survival, that's when, we softened up and we had um, new priorities like ESG. But now we're retreating to survival mode.
Yeah.
Right? And in a new phase of it, because of course the demand for metals, yes, for defense, but we continue to have a demand by at least Europe uh, and other nations on transit energy metals for AI. So the competition is going to increase for these scarce resources, and yes, it's going to require a lot more investment, and investors are going to need to be savvier about it. And I suppose this is what's so great about programs like yours, is that there's an opportunity here to start dissecting this and you know understanding what investors need to know so that we can help make that available to them so they can make better choices.
Excellent. Now, it's really nice to hear some of your views on some of these broader themes that are likely to shape the mining industry going forward. But maybe turning back to metals for humanity, you told us about the zinc example that inspired your
Yes,
idea, then your silver initiative. I mean,
yes.
are there other metals that you're working with and looking for practical uses from the miners into the local communities?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. Yes, there are. So, you know, um, having worked on well, having watched what Tech did with Zinc, and what we've done with Fresnillo, with silver focused on water. It's great. Anything that you could do, any particular program that you can do is obviously wonderful and can have impact in local communities. But we believe that if you really are looking to give these communities a chance at systemic change, you need an integrated program. So not just one area with one medal, one SDG, one sustainable development goal, but a comprehensive understanding of what the challenges are and how they can be addressed. And if many of them can be addressed using metals, then that's exactly what we're going to do. And if others require other approaches, then that will also be presented to the mining company so that we can look at how that could be addressed. But our focus is, how do we use the metals to address the needs? And so basically, the pilot we have underway right now in Mexico, with Fresnillo again at one of their mines, which again later it may be connected to this traceability and transparency program that we also discussed. But we're looking at implementing a program that is addressing access to clean water using silver, which we've already done, but adding to that now renewable energy using copper, food security using zinc, communications networks using steel, aluminum, and then in a slightly different way, but also very important for the maintenance of these programs long term, especially once the mine is gone, a kind of development of an alternative economy that would help the community, maintain itself once the mine is gone, and they learn managerial skills through these projects that we do. And for that one, we're looking at using gold as a way to set up a fund that allows us to have this seed capital for entrepreneurship programs that local people might be interested in doing. And again, that way they can maintain themselves going forward, and they're able to maintain all of the technologies that we introduce.
So thank you, Ingrid, so much for sharing your valuable insights with us. Please do let our audience know how they can read more about Metals for Humanity and follow you.
Yes, well, yes, that would be great. It would be great if you could come to our website, metalsforhumanity.org. And if you want more information, you can either write me, Ingrid, at metalsforhumanity.org, or at info@metalsforhumanity.com. We'd love to hear, we'd love to hear more from investors, what their concerns are, what they'd like to hear, how they believe they could be assisted in making better decisions as to which mining companies to invest in.
Excellent. Well, that's what we have time for today. It's a great thanks everyone for tuning in, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode of the Commodity Exchange. If you do want to hear more from us at Wisdom Tree, please do subscribe on whichever platform you're using. You can follow me on X, formerly Twitter, with the handle at Nitesh Shah WT. And if you want to learn more about commodities, please do visit Wisdom Tree's website, where we have a wide range of research material and insights. Until next time, to clarify, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Wisdom Tree and Metals for Humanity and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. Thank you very much for tuning in.